Today is Friday, March 26th at the Edith A. O'Leary Senior Center in North Reading, Massachusetts. We have a presentation on beekeeping featuring Bill Denhard.
Beekeeping started as a strange, well, it is a strange chain of events. Many years ago, I had 2 apple trees in the backyard that bloomed beautifully and never had fruit. And that irked me no end. So I went out and told the apple trees where to get off. And I told them, you're either going to bear fruit, or I'll cut you down, or else you'll get bees, but you're not going to have all those flowers and then give me no fruit. And somebody overheard me. And my next birthday, a gentleman I knew who kept bees walked up to me and handed me a beehive, like this one over here, and said, "Happy birthday." And about the most I knew about bees was how to spell the word at that time. So that's what got me started, and the fascination grew as time went by. But bees are essential to our society. They pollinate most of our fruit and many of our vegetables. Cucumbers, squash, and even legumes like beans and peas. And they're essential to our diet. And currently there's a plague on bees. We don't know what it is. But a beekeeper goes out to his hive one day and it's full of bees and they're working like mad. And he goes out a week later and nobody's home. And we don't know what the cause is. So that did happen something like 40 years ago too. It was in Virginia and Pennsylvania. And we called it disappearing disease at that time. Now they call it colony collapse syndrome. And they haven't quite figured out how to overcome it. They really don't know what causes it. And they're conjecturing in many ways. But to start us off, I'll tell you a few things, show you a few slides. After that, if you don't ask questions, there's no more talking, okay? So ask questions. Beekeeping started many thousands of years ago. That is a primitive rock carving or scraping, a petroglyph if you will. And so is a beekeeper with a sack in his hand for containing the honey. He's climbing up a ladder of some kind. That's a cave. And he's reaching into the cave, and that's where the beehive is. And you can see the bees flying around. So these people didn't do petroglyphs into scale, so the bees look very large compared to the man. But that was early beekeeping. He just went out and robbed the honey. As a matter of fact, today when we take honey for ourselves, we call it robbing the bees. Because whether you know it or not, honey is their food. They don't make it for us. They make it for themselves to eat. And their other food is pollen. So bees are true vegetarians. All their food comes from flowers. Now this is further symbolized by another carving. And there, way out of scale, is another cluster of honey and honeycomb, and a beekeeper reaching in, the bees flying out. And what he's got in his hand is a torch, because these ancient people stealing honey from the bees found that if they went at night, the bees were less likely to fly, and they couldn't attack them. Certainly they wouldn't attack them before they got there, but during the daylight they would to defend their hive. So the beekeeper started using a torch to see what he was doing. And he found out that the smoke from the torch kind of toned the bees down. They weren't so excited. So today we still use smoke to distract the bees when we go into a hive. And by the way, bees are very much like us. On a day like today, their tempers are miserable. And you're near that, I know, in the long weather. In a bright sunny day when it's warm and there are flowers out, they're very cheerful and very tolerant. And for instance, I can take a hive like that, which is 4 feet tall, because we pile boxes one on top of the other. Take the whole thing apart, take the combs out, look at them, brush the bees out of the way, literally with my hand. Gently, but literally brush them out of the way and not get stung. Now if someone took the roof off your house and put all the furniture on the lawn, you probably would be screaming mad. And so these wild, fierce bees that everyone is afraid of act very differently, act very, very placid, you might say. And they have been bred for that purpose. Now, we've all heard stories of the African bee. And the African bee, coming from Africa, was introduced to South America some years ago because they wanted to improve the strains of bees. But the African bees are fierce. You go near a hive, you disturb a hive, you get stung very badly. And the reason is, as I showed you in the first two pictures, when the beekeepers in Africa, century after century, went after the honey and stole it and molested the bees, guess which ones they didn't bother? The tough ones. And so the tough ones stayed on and propagated and produced the Africanized bee, which is really a tough insect. Very, very trigger happy. Fortunately, we don't have them. And here is an example. Today they keep bees in Africa, and they're in logs. They're hollowed out logs. And they hang them in a tree to keep the bees out of the way of their enemies, which want to steal the honey or kill the bees, either one. So that's a preventative measure, not a technique of beekeeping, but it keeps the bees from being killed. In the early days in this country, bees were imported from England and Europe, a black bee, and were kept in what are called wattle hives, which is a conical shaped hive made out of cow dung and straw to make the structure. Later on, they got scientific and used just straw and made what are called skep hives. There's 3 of them in that housing. And the bees inside, it's a hollow comb. They put jam sticks in there, and the bees hang the comb on the sticks. That means the comb goes every which way, helter-skelter. It's a mess. And very tough to get apart. And getting honey from those skeps, again, involved killing the bees in order to get at it, because they had to rip everything out. They had to get rid of the bees, rid of the bees first. Then they got constructive, and they made log, or sometimes fabricated wood hives, and again they put sticks in there and let the bees hang the honeycomb from it. Today, we have hives. I've got one here, part of one, which is composed of boxes we sit on top of each other. What I have here physically is that bottom board. Skip the big box, skip the excluded. The box on top is what I brought, a sample of, and the inner cover and outer cover. Now the bees own, as far as we're concerned, own the bottom part with the big box. If we're going to get any honey, we get out of the upper box. If they don't fill it, we don't get any honey. They have to have about 100 pounds of honey to eat during the winter to keep warm and stay alive. And they eat honey and shiver to keep warm. This hive, I'll pass one around. This box has 10 frames in it. Now please handle it by the wood. The comb is very delicate. We provide this house for the bees, and we provide that wooden frame with a sheet of beeswax set in the center of it, just a sheet. And it's all crinkled up as the bottom of the honeycomb is, and the bees build the comb with more wax that they make in their bodies. Now there's a cut mark on there. For us to get the honey out, we take a hot knife and we skive off the honey. Excuse me, we skive off the cappings. As a matter of fact, the interesting thing is we don't have to run any tests to tell if honey is ready to eat. See, the syrup or the nectar they get from the flowers is like, I say, like dishwater. It's so watery. By the time they evaporate the water out and make the honey, it's 86% sugar, 83% sugar. And it will not come out of the comb by itself. And when it's all ripe, they seal it up with a covering of beeswax. We have to cut that covering off and put that frame in a device to spin it and throw the honey out, because it will not come out by itself. As an example of another kind of hive, the Egyptians kept bees. And they kept them in these tubes here made of clay. And they would go in there and take the honey out. This gentleman is pulling out pieces of honey. I can do this without fouling the view. This man has a smoker. These people are here passing over. And I do believe that this man is making mead in this container. Just lay it on the table. The Egyptians, the people in England, all like mead. It's alcoholic. And to make mead, you have to dilute the honey, because honey kills yeast. You dilute it way down, let it ferment, and that makes everybody happy, because I think the Britons lost. They're invaded from Europe. I think they lost because the Britons were all drunk on mead and they couldn't fight. Here's a scene in the hive with the queen in the center, the big bee up like this, and her attendants around her. The queen has to do nothing except lay eggs. She has to lay 1,500 of them every day. Day and night she lays eggs, day after day. She never has to feed herself. The other bees, the workers, her daughters, feed her. She doesn't have to clean up after herself. The workers, her daughters, do that. She doesn't have to feed her babies. The workers do that. The queen is a lousy mother. You know, she just lays an egg and walks away. Never even bothers to look at it again. It's up to the rest of the family to do that. Which reminds me of another thing. A beehive is not a bunch of animals together. Insects are animals. A beehive is one animal. There may be 50,000 bees in that hive, one queen, and that's one animal, because no one of them can live by themselves. The queen can't feed herself. The workers can't lay eggs to perpetuate the hive. And the drone is an insurance policy, because if the queen dies and there's a new queen, she has to mate before she can lay the eggs to keep the hive going. So each has a function, but they're all totally dependent on each other. Now here's the bee family. The worker on your left is essentially a small version of the queen, and the drone on the right is the male, queen in the center. And what's miraculous to me, and has kept me fascinated with bees, is that when a queen lays an egg, it can be any one of those adults. Any egg can be any one of those adults. If she chooses to lay an unfertilized egg, it will be a male, a drone, on the right. If she lays a fertilized egg, it will either be a queen like herself or a worker. And that depends on diet. When the egg hatches into a little white larva, if it is fed honey and pollen, it grows up to be a worker. If it is fed royal jelly, and I'll tell you what that is in a minute, it grows up to be a queen. Even more marvelous is that each of those members of the family has its own set of instincts. And those instincts are determined at the moment it's laid and later by diet. That's very different from us. The queen herself, when she mates, stores the sperm. And she carries no fertilized eggs in her body, but she fertilizes them the instant the egg is laid.